rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu warahmatullahi
All praise and thanks be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Choicest peace, blessings and salutations upon our master and exemplar Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. So today I've got Surah Al-Fil on schedule. Are there any remaining aspects of Surah Al-Humaza that I said I was going to cover that we didn't cover? Have you finished that? Silence.
I think we're done with that one, no?
According to my understanding, yes, but I mean, I could be mistaken. Okay, khair. Sister Tawheeda and Irshad said that we have completed that. So let's begin with Surah Al-Fil, inshallah. Surah Al-Fil, one of the Makki surah. There's a lot to be said about this particular surah. Let's open up an English tafsir so we can share a reading at least of that surah. Bi'idhnillah. So what we're going to work from today. There's Ibn Kathir, and there's Ma'arif al-Quran, and there's Jalalain in English as well. I'm giving you the option while I'm still looking for the files. But
Maulana,
yes, yes.
Generally for these tafsir, do they not cover the Quran verse for verse? So I was looking at Ma'ariful Quran for Surah Abasa for Maulana.
Yes.
And then basically the last 5 verses weren't really covered. So, yeah, to my understanding, I thought they would actually go through each verse and then provide
Which
information on everything.
surah were you looking at?
Abasa. It's for another class.
Look, according to my understanding, they do cover word for word, verse for verse, but it's not a blanket rule for every single tafsir and every single verse. It depends on what the author of the particular tafsir had set out. We have examples of tafsir. Let me show you here. I have examples of tafsir which only cover one surah, or perhaps the author didn't complete the tafsir, so he only covered some surah. In other instances, like Tafsir Ayat al-Ahkam, the one that you see on screen, the author would only cover verses pertaining to Ahkam. This is another example of Nail al-Maram, Tafsir Ayat al-Ahkam. So only the verses of Ahkam. Other tafasir would only cover, certain chapters of the Quran. So it depends on the author. And then if you look at one individual tafsir, let's say, what's the one I'm thinking about now? Mawsu'ah to Tafsir. I forget the full name, but it's a more contemporary text where the author looks at it thematically as opposed to atomistically. So it doesn't cover word for word, verse for verse, but rather he covers, concepts. So if a concept was mentioned already, then he would refer back to it. So I'm not sure about Ma'arif al-Quran. There, I feel it's a bit more exhaustive. I think that the author does generally cover everything verse for verse, but not necessarily in great detail. Like sometimes he would leave out a section because it's very simple to understand, or it's been covered before in terms of theme. So there's no blanket ruling in that regard, right? I hope that helps.
Okay, Maulana. Shukran.
Afwan. So let's look at the Surah Al-Fil from Ma'arif al-Quran, since you mentioned it. Somebody needs to leave for a janaza. Allah granted deceased Jannah and sabr to the family. Sister Tawheeda, Ibn Kathir has a verse for Surah to Abasa. Yeah, I would imagine so, and most tafasir would actually as well. So let's look at Surah Al-Fil. Yeah, you see it's the elephant, of course. Al-Fil refers to the elephant. The surah is Makki and it has 5 verses. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول صدق الله العظيم. In brief translation, Alam tara, have you not seen? Kaifa, how? Fa'ala rabbuka, how your Lord did. Bi ashabil fil, with the companions of the elephant. Alam yaja'al, did he not make? Kaidahum, their plot. Fi tadlil, astray and lost. Wa arsala alayhim, and he sent down against them. Tayran, birds. Ababil, birds in flocks. Tarmihim, casting them or throwing them. Bihijaratin, with stones. Min sijil, of baked clay. فجعلهم, and then made them كعصف مأكول, like harvested harvested pastures, or as you can see it can also be translated as eaten up chaff. So what's left over after the harvest has been completely destroyed or completely harvested. Commentary. So the subject matter of the surah refers to the story of the people of the elephants who came with an army of elephants for the purpose of destroying the house of Allah, the holy Kaaba in Mecca. But their plan backfired and the divine scourge took over them. Allah destroyed the army with a flock of ordinary birds. Thus their plans were foiled and thwarted. When did this event take place? Historically, this event took place in the very year in which the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born at Mecca. According to some traditions and the popular view among the historians, Ibn Kathir, the scholars of Hadith have taken this event as a special type of mu'jiza or miracle of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. But the term mu'jiza in its real sense refers to an abnormal event shown by Allah to prove the claim of a prophet to having been sent by him. Therefore, a mu'jiza is shown after a prophet's divine commission. However, sometimes it happens that a miraculous event takes place before a prophet's claim to prophethood. This, in the parlance of the scholars of hadith, is called irhas, which means prologue or introduction. The word rahs means a foundation stone. Qamus, that comes from the dictionary. As the miraculous events taking place before the advent of prophets or before their claim to prophethood are meant to introduce and affirm that soon a particular prophet will be divinely commissioned, they are referred to as irhas. Many miraculous incidents of this nature, irhasat, occurred before the birth and the advent of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and one of them was the incident of the people of the elephants who were miraculously prevented by the heavenly scourge from destroying the house of Allah. So that's just some introduction. What do you know about this? Let's see if you can remember from the madrasa days. So the Quraysh, they had the Kaaba, and the Kaaba has been there since arguably the time of Nabi Adam ﷺ, but more historically reliable since the time of Nabi Ibrahim ﷺ and Nabi Ismail. The Kaaba was the pride and joy of the Arabian Peninsula, obviously because of the monotheism that it was established upon. But as time passed by, the monotheism was somewhat diluted and to another extent forgotten. And this is when Allah Ta'ala usually sends another prophet with a message to revive that monotheism among that particular group of people. What happened at this point, however, was that the king of Habasha, the king of Abyssinia at that time, he found that, this idea of Makkah being the center for the Arabian Peninsula is not a good idea for him. He wants, his area. He wants Abyssinia to be the pride and joy of the Arabian Peninsula. He wanted people to come and make pilgrimage to Abyssinia as opposed to going to Makkah. So people would still be making Hajj, would still be making pilgrimage. And idols were kept around the Kaaba. So people would go there not only for trade, but also for pilgrimage in a religious sense, albeit a wayward religion and idolatry. He then built a temple in Habasha and invited people to come and make pilgrimage to that temple. But because the Kaaba was the pride and joy of the Quraysh, they decided that they're not going to stand for this. So they went to that temple and desecrated the temple. According to some narrations, this one person actually defecated in the temple and really desecrated it. So he was angered, obviously so. And then he took an army to go and destroy the Kaaba. And at the head of the army was he himself with his elephant Mahmud. And this phenomenon of having an army with an elephant in it wasn't known to the Arabs among the Quraysh. They didn't see such things. I'm sure for many people, it must have been the first time they even saw an elephant in person, because they are not native to those lands. So this huge army and this huge elephant came to destroy the Kaaba, but Allah had a different plan. So the story of the people of the elephants. Ibn Kathir, the leading authority on prophetic tradition and history, recounts the story as follows. Yemen was under the control of the rulers of Himyar. They were idolaters. Their last king was Dhu Nuwas, an idolater himself, was the enemy of the righteous Christians of his time, who believed in and worshipped one Allah. He persecuted the believers who were opposed to idol worship by burning them alive. Most scholars agree that he killed in cold blood by throwing about 20,000 sincere and righteous Christians in his city into a large fire pit, burning them alive in an effort to get them to give up their sincere religion. This is the story of the people of the fire pit, Ashabul Ukhdud, referred to in Surah. What Surah is that? Kutila Ashabul Ukhdud. Surah number 85. I forget the name slips me now. But that surah that speaks about Kutila Ashabul Ukhdud an-Nari Dhatil Waqud, that's the story referred to here. Two men somehow managed to escape from him. They fled to Syria and took refuge with Caesar, who was himself a Christian and the emperor of Syria. They requested the emperor to avenge this cruel act of Dhu Nuwas. Caesar wrote to Najashi, the Negus, the king of Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, who was closer to the home of the man. Najashi sent two governors with him, Arbat and Abraha, along with a huge army. The army invaded Yemen and freed the whole country from the possession of Himyar. Dhu Nuwas tried to escape but was drowned in the sea and died. Yemen thus became part of the Abyssinian dominion and Abraha was appointed its viceroy. However, he and Arbat fought each other until Arbat was eventually killed and Abraha emerged victorious. The latter was appointed the commander of the Abyssinian army in Yemen and the governor of that region. Having captured Yemen, he built a superbly luxurious cathedral in his area. So he didn't build the cathedral in Habasha, he built the cathedral in Yemen. But it was built by the Habashis because Abraha was a Habashi, right? And he was the ruler there. The purpose was to attract the people of Yemen to make pilgrimage to this cathedral instead of the Kaaba in Mecca. It was huge and tall so that a person standing at the bottom was not able to see the top. He decorated the structure with gold, silver and other precious gems. In short, he meant it to be an architectural masterpiece, second to none or unsurpassed in the world, to be revered by all and sundry and divert pilgrims from the sacred mosque in Mecca to his cathedral in Yemen. He did this after he had witnessed the love and enthusiasm of the Yemeni Arabs, which were the same as those felt all over Arabia for the Kaaba, with the aim of making them forsake the attachment to the Mosque of Mecca and turn instead to his new luxurious cathedral. Thus he proclaimed throughout his kingdom that no one should ever visit the Kaaba in Mecca and that the pilgrimage should from now on take place to his so-called Kaaba in Yemen. Although the Arabs were idol worshippers, the love and reverence for the religion of Prophet Ibrahim والسلام, and the Kaaba had permeated their hearts. As a result, the Andan, Qahtan and Quraysh tribes were enraged and infuriated by this proclamation. One night, someone entered the church and defecated in it. According to the other narratives, a nomadic tribe halted near the church and started a fire for their own needs. The wind on that day was blowing violently and the cathedral caught on fire and sustained much loss. When Abraha came to know about it and learned that the Qurashi had done this, he swore to march to the house of Mecca and destroy it stone by stone. Thus he prepared himself and set out with a huge and powerful army so that none might prevent him from carrying out his mission. He asked for Najashi's permission, he permitted him and sent for him. Particularly for this expedition, a special elephant whose name was Mahmud was unusually huge in size and powerful in strength, the like of which had never been seen before. By the way, often people think that it was an army of elephants, yani that there were so many elephants in this army, whereas historically more accurate would be that there was one huge elephant by the name of Mahmud. Whether there were other elephants or not, I don't think there was, but there seems to be very little evidence in that regard. Right? The king of Abyssinia sent in 8 more elephants as reinforcements for the army. Right? So here you see one report saying that there were 8 more elephants, but this is not elephants like Mahmud. Mahmud was like exceptionally huge, right? So now we have Mahmud and reportedly 8 more elephants in this particular army. Their intention was to use this extraordinary elephant, Mahmud that is, to demolish the Kaaba. They planned to do this by fastening chains to the pillars of the Kaaba and placing the other ends around the neck of the elephant. Then they would make the elephant pull on them in order to tear down the walls of the Kaaba. Allah forbid, all at once. When the Arabs heard of Abraha's expedition, they considered it their moral obligation to defend the sacred house and thwart the evil plans of the conspirators. Thus, the Arabs raised a large army under the command of Dhu Nafar, a Yemenite Arab. He called the Arabs to go to war against Abraha and fight in defense of the sacred house so that the enemy is unable to tear it down. The people responded to him readily and entered into battle with the enemy, but he defeated them. This was due to Allah's will that no humans should protect his house and his intent to expose the enemy to embarrassment and vulnerate the sacred sanctuary to the highest degree. Though Nafar was captured and taken prisoner, the army continued on its way until it came to the settlement of Banu Khatham, the Banu Khatham tribe. Their leader, Nufail ibn Habib, led his entire tribe against the army, but they too were defeated and Nufail was taken prisoner. Abraha at first decided to kill him, but at second thought he forgave him and took him as his guide to show him the way to Hijaz. When the army approached Ta'if, the people of Thaqif, who were the inhabitants of Ta'if, they went out to Abraha. They wanted to pacify him because they had heard about the fate of those who had resisted him previously. Also, they were afraid that he would demolish their temple consecrated in the name of their idol Allat. So they were more worried about the idol Lat that was at the Kaaba than the Kaaba itself. Therefore, they did not resist him on the understanding that he would not touch the idol of Lat. He was compassionate to them and they sent a guide with him by the name of Abu... I can't recall how this name is pronounced in Arabic, so I'm not going to say it here. When they arrived in a place called, again, same thing, near Makkah, they settled there. This was the pasture where the camels of the Quraysh grazed. Abraha sent his troops on a foray to capture the camels and other grazing animals of the Makkans. They accomplished their mission. They also drove away about 200 camels of Abdul Muttalib. This was the grandfather of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the leader of the Quraysh. Abraha then sent an emissary named Hanata al-Himyari to enter Makkah and bring to him the leader of the Quraysh. He mandated him to convey to the leader of the Quraysh his message that the king did not come to fight with the Makkans unless they stood in his way of destroying their sacred sanctuary. Arriving in the city, Hanata was directed to Abdul Muttalib ibn Hisham, to whom he communicated Abraha's message. According to Ibn Ishaq's narration, Abdul Muttalib replied, "By Allah, we too have no desire to fight him, nor do we have the might to do so. This is the sacred sanctuary of Allah, built by his friend Prophet Ibrahim ﷺ. If he wills to prevent Abraha from pulling it down, he will protect it. And if he allows him to approach it, by Allah, we have no means to defend it." So Hanata told him, "Come with me to Abraha." So Abdul Muttalib went with him. When Abraha saw him, he was highly impressed because Abdul Muttalib had the most handsome, charming and attractive personality. He descended from his throne and sat with the latter on a carpet on the ground. He then said to his interpreter to ask him, "What do you need?" Abdul Muttalib replied to the interpreter, "I want the king to give back my 200 camels." So this is like an absurd statement, right? "Which his soldiers have taken from me." Then Abraha told his interpreter to relay to him, "When I first set my eyes on you, I admired you greatly and had great respect for you. But all that is lost now. You speak only of your 200 camels, while you fully well know that I have come to tear down your Kaaba, which is the embodiment of your religion and the religion of your forefathers. You did not even say a single word to persuade me to spare it." Abdul Muttalib calmly responded, "I am the owner of my camels and am concerned about them. I am not the owner of Allah's house. The master of the house knows best how to protect his house." Abraha rudely rebuffed, "Your God cannot protect it from me." Abdul Muttalib made a rejoinder, "Then do as you like, or take your chance," in other words. According to other narratives, there were other chiefs of Quraysh with Abdul Muttalib at the time of his negotiation. They proposed to Abraha that if he withdrew from the sanctuary, the entire region of Tihama would pay him a third of the agricultural produce annually as tribute. But he turned down the offer. He then gave back Abdul Muttalib's camels to him. Abdul Muttalib took his camels and went back home, ordering his people to leave Mecca and seek shelter at the top of the mountains. By the way, we cannot take ahkam from this. Okay? Often people do this. They look at stories of the past and they say, well, look at the incident of, for example, Ashabul Kahf. They had a dog, right? So let's take a law from that. It's perfectly fine to have dogs. Or look at Abdul Muttalib. Why don't the people just evacuate Bayt al-Maqdis, get out of Palestine? The Rabb of Masjid al-Aqsa will protect Masjid al-Aqsa. Leave the place, save your lives. Abdul Muttalib did that. Why can't we do that? You can't take ahkam from this because this would be categorized under, well, even this would be debatable. But there's a concept called shar' man qablana. The sharia or the shara'i', the legislations, the legal, the laws basically of those who came before us, right? This not necessarily part of that because Abdul Muttalib is not necessarily acting in accordance with the Sharia, but any of the laws that come from history before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would automatically be abrogated by the law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because his Sharia is the last and final one until the day of Qiyamah, right? So you can't take law from this. That's the bottom line. Okay, the ahkam are to be taken only from the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. This is simply just to learn about the history and perhaps derive lessons from that. And that's a very, very important point. And I hope that is clear. Right? Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. He feared that atrocities might be committed by the army against them. Then he went with a few figures to the Quraysh, to the sacred sanctuary. He held the metal ring of the door of the Kaaba and prayed Allah to give them victory over Abraha and his army. While hanging onto the ring of the Kaaba's door, he earnestly implored, "We have no strength to face the army of Abraha, so, O my Lord, defend your Kaaba." Having so prayed in all earnestness, Abdul Muttalib led all the Makkans to the neighboring mountains because they were convinced that Allah's scourge would overtake Abraha and his troops. This is the reason why they spoke to Abraha about their camels and not about the house of Allah. When the next morning dawned, Abraha prepared to enter the sacred city of Makkah. He prepared the elephant named Mahmud and mobilized his army, and they turned the elephant towards the Kaaba. At that moment, Nufail ibn Habib, whom Abraha had captured earlier, approached it and stood next to it. Taking it by its ear, he said, "Return safely where you came from, because you are verily in the sacred city of Allah." So he's the elephant whisperer, right? He tells the elephant this. Then he released the elephant's ear and it knelt and sat down forthwith. In other words, the elephant sat right there where he was. The elephant drivers exerted all efforts to persuade the elephant to enter the city, but their efforts were in vain. Then they tried striking it with large iron spears and putting iron arrowheads in its trunk. They beat it on its head with axes and used hooked staffs to pull it out of its resistance and make it stand, but it refused. So they turned it towards Yemen, and it rose and it walked quickly. Then they turned it towards Syria, and it walked fast. Then they turned it towards the east, and it walked briskly. Then they turned it towards Makkah, and it knelt and sat down again. This was one aspect of the manifestation of the divine power unfolding itself miraculously. On the other hand, some flocks of birds were seen coming from the sea. Each bird carried 3 pebbles of the size of gram seeds or lentils, 1 in each claw and 2 in its beak. According to Waqidi's narration, the birds looked unusual, which were never seen before. They looked smaller than pigeons, and their claws were red in color. They flew over Abraha's army and pelted them with the pebbles. Each pebble was more devastating than the bullet of a revolver when it fell on anything. It tore directly through the body and settled deep in the ground. Seeing this scourge, the elephants fled in panic, except one which was harmed and destroyed by the pebble. Not all of Abraha's men were destroyed instantly. People escaped in different directions. They died excruciatingly on their way back. As Allah had willed that the most distressful scourge should be inflicted upon Abraha, He did not allow him to die immediately. In fact, Allah afflicted him with a deadly disease, a kind of poison spread thoroughly through his entire body and caused every single part to decay. His limbs began to rot and separate from the rest of his body, and he started losing one finger after another. His body was carried back in that state to Yemen. By the time they arrived back in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, his body was broken down limb by limb until he eventually died. Two of Mahmud's, name of the elephant, drivers remained in Mecca, but both of them became blind and paralyzed. Muhammad ibn Ishaq, the compiler of Surah, reports that Sayyida Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha narrates that she saw them blind and paralyzed. Her sister Sayyida Asma radiallahu ta'ala anha says that she saw the two blind and paralyzed men begging. The people of the elephants is a momentous event in Arab history which was witnessed by hundreds of Arabs. It is to this well-known historical incident that this surah refers, and Allah knows best. So you can see that historically this was a very, very significant incident, and suffice as evidence for that is the fact that this year in which this occurred was called what? What was the year named? Amul
Feel.
Fil. And we know this year for two reasons. The one is because of the incident itself, and the other because that was the year in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born. And this is very significant. You know, when it comes to this topic, the topic of Mawlid, right? It's a very controversial topic, and I'm not going to get into the topic now at all. But the one thing that I find profound, not the practice of Mawlid, just the historical event of the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is it highlighted in the Quran? People would say no, right? But if you look at this surah, now probably next week we will get into this, but Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh are juxtaposed. They are next to one another, and there are many similarities. They are looked at as sister surah, and in some copies of the Masahif of the Sahaba, of the copies of the Qurans of the Sahaba, they would be written as one surah, right? With no basmala between. That's not the correct and agreed upon way. They are, in actual fact, two separate surah, but they are so related that it's like the one is a continuation from the other. And you can even see that in its rhyming scheme, right? أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ أَلَمْ يَجْعَلْ كَيْدَهُمْ فِي تَضْلِيلٍ وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَّأْكُولٍ لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ إِيلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّنْ خَوْفٍ. It's looked at as one surah. The story is one. The one is directly connected to the other. And although this is like a sort of a build-up, if you look at it from the beginning, Allah tells you the story. He highlights the spectacle of the story. Alam tara kaifa, the how. Not just what happened. The what happened you've just read. The what happened is fine. But the how, the way that Allah chose to cause this event to transpire, in that is the lesson, okay? So how Allah did, and then why Allah did. Why did Allah do all of this? Who was He saving? Was He saving muwahhidun, people worshipping one Allah, making kalimatullahi al-ulya, celebrating the oneness of Allah? Or was Allah saving idol worshippers who were committing shirk around the Kaaba, which was intended for monotheism? It's the latter. So why would Allah save them? The answer, لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ. I'm not going to give it right now, but that's where the answer is. He saved them لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ, in order to save the Quraysh. Why did He save the Quraysh? He saved the Quraysh not only there, but رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. He saved them in all of the expeditions as well, which gave them an unparalleled power over the rest of the Arabian Peninsula, and made them central. رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت. So let them Let them be ibad, let them be worshippers and servants of the house. Rabba hadha al-bayt, the Lord of this house in actual fact, not the idols around it. Okay, so bringing them back to Tawheed. رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف. And on top of that, highlighting the benefits that they would get because of this event. So why all of this? What's the point? It doesn't make sense. If you look at the Quran and what it stands for and the objectives that it seeks to establish, the event of the field doesn't make sense, except if one considers one very important fact, that all of this preempted the birth of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The event had nothing to do with the significance of the Quraysh and their practices and their culture and their tribe. It had nothing to do with the history of Abraha and the elephant, and all of these things were irrelevant. And they were all only impacted because of the either indirect or direct correlation with that event of the birth of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So both surah, Suratul Fil as well as Suratul Quraysh, can be looked at as announcements of the coming of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They can also be looked at as the Quranic emphasis on the importance of him and the importance of his mission alayhi salatu wasalam. And in that sense, his birth is highlighted in the Quran. As for the practice of celebrating his birth and how it is practiced and so on, that's a discussion for another time. That's a discussion that is held within fiqh. But for our purposes here, that is the context that I wish for you to have in relation to the surah before we enter into the first verse. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now from this point onwards, we can look at as you can see in the tafsir of Ma'arif al-Quran, he's got here lexical analysis. So there he's also going into the tafsir. So in actual fact, I won't look at this one next week. We'll look at a different one. But now we can look at the surah, or the surah, both of them, verse for verse, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Right? I hope that made sense and that was of benefit. I saw a hand raised. Brother Irshad, Bismillah.
While we in this, before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of the surah, is there any other historical accounts from non-Muslim sources or non-Islamic sources rather that reaccounts this year of the elephant? Just out of interest.
That's a very good question. I don't know. I'd have to check. In fact, you can also check, do some research on your side, see if there are any. But of course, you're going to have to look at reliable accounts and accounts that can be verified in some way or the other. But not that I know of. As far as historical accounts from our side, remember the most authentic, historically, in fact, from the beginning of time till now, the most authentic historical document is the Quran. And then on top of that, the culture of the Arabs that has been passed down from generation to generation still contains the names of the years, and that year is Amul Fil. So in that sense, it's another historical account. So Allah knows best if that's sort of counted as an added supplement to the historical accounts. But from other sources, perhaps Abyssinian sources, Abyssinian history, Yemeni history, etc., non-Muslim sources for that matter, I don't know off the cuff. It's something that has to be checked, right?
Okay.
Afwan, barakallahu fikum, Sister Shanaz says, Jazakallah. Okay, barakallahu fikum. Thank you for that. Allah accept and bless us all. So next week, come ready for a jam-packed session. We're going to look at the translation of each verse, word for word, some balagha and rhetoric that happens there. And hopefully we'll start with the Arabic as well. If not, then the week thereafter we will look at the Arabic analyses of the verses and of the words within those verses, inshallah. But as time is already up, we will have to stop on that. Jazakumullah khairan. Have a good day further. Enjoy your Women's Day tomorrow. For me, it's like a running day or holiday. but nonetheless enjoy it, and may Allah keep us safe, bless us all. For those who are suffering from any illnesses, pain, diseases, may Allah grant them complete shifa. For those who have lost family members and loved ones, and friends and community members, Allah grant the deceased Jannatul Firdaus, and those who remain behind, the bereaved, may Allah grant us contentment and sabr in our hearts. Take us out of the darkness and into the light. Guide us, protect us, safeguard us. We're living in trialing times, difficult times, but it is what we make of it, right? There's no bad for the believer. The believer, all of the affairs are good for them. The apparently good and the apparently bad. The apparently good because we need to display shukr, and the apparently bad because we need to display sabr. And by doing so, the matters of the believers are all good for them. I don't believe that. I used to believe that this is going to come to an end soon. I don't think it's ever going to come to an end. I think we're going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That the idea that we may have of what is normal has completely changed and is gone now. In all likelihood, we're going to be transitioning into a new way of life as far as the world is concerned. But for us as Muslims, we should always have had one ultimate way of life, and that's the way of Islam. So may Allah guide us, protect us, and grant us the tawfiq to follow Islam in the way that we should, and in the way that would be beneficial for us. Barakallahu feekum, everyone. I see your comments. I acknowledge them. Allah bless you and accept. Appreciate it. Until next time, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad, subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله
Assalamu alaikum.
وبركاته.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.